I'm Scott Al Miller, and this is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about some expat skills, or a way of analyzing situations that you're looking at or things you're wondering about. This is going to make sense, trust me, when we get into it. I am on the autism spectrum, as most of you know, and one of the benefits, I guess, of being autistic is we have a tendency to see and hear and experience the world in reverse. I know that sounds really crazy, but it's actually kind of true. I'm not sure I'm explaining it in a really great way, but I'm going to explain what I mean and explain how you can use this autistic tool as part of your means of being able to understand a new country that you're moving into a little bit better. So we're going to explain what I mean and help you guys have a better way of just understanding the world right after the bump. This is one of those weird things that people who are not autistic are generally going to be like, what? That's a thing? This is weird. But when people say things to me, I often hear sentence structure in reverse. Not meaning that all the words are reversed, but I hear everything backwards in the way that a lot of like puns and weird, not very funny dad jokes are structured. And so to me, many times when people are talking, I hear the weird dad joke version of whatever they're saying first, and then I have to take a moment, reassemble the sentence into the order that they actually stated it in, and realize what they said. It slows me down just a tiny bit, but for the most part, it happens pretty quickly, so it's not too big of a deal. And it's an interesting thing that happens, though, because people don't really think about it as a thing, and they wonder why people who are like me are constantly laughing about things that no one else has heard as a joke, and that we come up with a lot of weird jokes very quickly that aren't actually very funny, and that people are like, where did that come from? Why? That's not a thing, right? And it could be like, I rode a horse into town, right? And immediately we hear things like, the horse rode me into town, or, something like that. And it's like just little bits, like subjects and objects get reversed as the first way that we hear it, and then we reassemble it. It's not that we don't understand what's said, it's that we hear that first, or some people do, right? Some people who have this trait of the spectrum. And so I'm always viewing this, and it does give me a lot of ability to sometimes break down sentences and understand exactly what's said more than other people have, because I have to do this analysis deeply on each sentence very quickly because I hear it in that order, right? It's just, it's more effort, but it does lend some benefits. And sometimes I understand things that are being said in a way that other people miss because of it. And the same thing happens with a lot of different situations. I have a tendency to look at things in both directions, and I'll explain what I mean and how you can apply this to being an expat. So this conversation just came up. A lot of times this happens, right? People will say things, and obviously this is very different from the sentence structure thing, but the point still stands, that most people, when they're, say, moving to Nicaragua, just as an example, so they're moving from the United States, I use these as the example all the time, moving from the U.S. to Nicaragua, so there's a lot of things that are foreign and weird, and people are like, wow, I can't believe it works this way. But I think that one of the reasons that I find so few things surprising is that I have thought about and examined how things work in reverse. If I was Nicaraguan and moving to the United States, or if I was from anywhere and moving to the United States, what would I experience? And then wonder how that's different from someone coming to Nicaragua. And so much of the time, the things that people are shocked about, when people are like, I can't believe it works that way. I would never put up with that, and so forth. You then say, well, are you okay with it happening in the U.S.? Because so often the thing that they describe is exactly how the U.S. works, how Canada works, how the U.K. works, how Guatemala works, how Mexico works. They're all working the same. It's just in many cases people are experiencing it for the first time in whatever new country they're going to. And if it's something that's unpleasant, say it's a lot of paperwork, or there's a cost to something, or something takes time, or whatever, or there's a permission issue that maybe you're not going to get the permission that you're hoping for. When these things come up, people have a tendency to react very negatively. I'm so angry, I would never put up living in a place that would do that. I'm not saying that people say this all the time, but I do get this fairly often as I would never put up with it. And then they describe something that is very specifically well known about the place that they came from being how they work. And it's weird. It's like, so you put up with it all the time, and getting away from it at least a little bit is too much, and you're going to go back to more of it? That's the opposite of what you just said. What are you talking about? But it's so an example is, oh, I can't believe how long and all this paperwork you have to do to become a resident in, say, Nicaragua or Guatemala or whatever. And it's like, do you know how much it takes to become a resident in the U.S.? It takes a lot more, and it's a lot less guaranteed. Like, now, I'm not saying that that's a good process. I'm not saying that we should look at one process and say, well, just because they do it bad or hard or whatever, that everyone else should get to too, and that we shouldn't all strive to be better. Of course, that's okay. But it's also important to maintain a perspective. Okay, yes, I'm upset that this process is hard, but where is it easy? Well, it generally isn't. Almost nowhere has it easy. These things are big life events, and sometimes they take a lot of effort, and we need to accept that. And if you understand, oh wow, it's really hard doing it to the US, it's reasonably hard doing it to Canada, I couldn't just trivially move to any country pretty much and do it, I have no way to do it to Europe, I could never do it to most of Asia. Some places, yeah, it'd be not too bad, but most places, like, this is actually one of the easiest in the world. When people are upset about the easiest, it's like, okay, I understand that you're upset that you can't just show up in any country, anytime, anywhere in the world and just live there. And we all wish that everyone could do that. That would be wonderful. Agreed. But in relative terms, we should not be angry with the places that are the easiest in the world, and instead be thankful that they're so much easier than the others. And instead of being angry and being like, why were you so easy? Be like, wow, I'm so thankful that this was all I had to do and not all this extra that I would have to do in some other part of the world or whatever. That's one thing, right? So we see a lot of that. It's the first time that someone's experiencing residency paperwork or border crossings or whatever. And so it feels really onerous. But as someone who's lived in a bunch of different countries, who's visited tons of countries, who's worked all over the world, there's a lot of different experiences, right? There's a variety of things that happen, and no place is completely trivial. And so another example that came up today, and this is a good one, I think. And it's a good question to ask, right? So I don't want to make it sound like, well, they shouldn't be asking this question. No, absolutely ask these questions, but I'm giving you tools to think about them to understand why it is the way that it is, right? And then someone asks, well, has anyone looked into importing a car in Nicaragua? And of course, we're like, yeah, we've all looked into it, right? Everyone looks into it. And the answer is always the same, right? It's super expensive, super complicated, and I'm not sure why anybody would want to do it. Right? I understand you already own a car and it's like, well, shouldn't I just bring it with me? I've never understood this. As someone who's moved around the world, one thing that never occurred to me was the idea of, should I pay to ship a car somewhere else? I should just sell it and buy a car somewhere else, right? One, because I don't want the same car in one place as another. Two, there's just all kinds of complications with that. Three, it's really rare that you are leaving one place and going to another place where you can give up a registration and gain a new one all in one day. Like, there's just a lot of things that don't add up. So having lived around the world, and having known people who've moved all around the world, it's never been a thing that I've understood why anyone would ever take their car with them, unless it's like a temporary thing and they're hoping to like bring a car and then bring it right back. Like, okay. But to actually move a car, I've never known anyone to do that. It's a really, I feel, weird thing to want to do. And that's why we always ask the question first, what are you trying to do? What drove you to do this? Because there's no obvious reason. But people are often like, well, I thought maybe it would be really quick and easy and be a cheap way to get a car. And that's, in theory plausible. But there's a bunch of stuff we should stop and think about that would answer this pretty quickly. One is, if you were to do this to the US or Canada or someplace like that, what would it be like? Well, one, you generally are not going to be able to do that until you're a resident. So that could take a few weeks or a few months, or in some cases a few years. You would be very much trapped in a residency process to try to deal with the car if that's a path that you decided to go down. So generally, you're not going to want to do that. You don't want to create this emergency because you've got a car you have to deal with. And I know some people who thought that would be not a big deal, brought a car without checking or against advice, and then completely destroyed their lives and ended up moving partially because of that decision alone, right? Big deal. But if you were to do this into like the US, okay, so you'd have to go through the process of getting residency, which could take you quite a long time before you were allowed to import a car. Once you are importing a car, you're talking about becoming a custom importer, right? There's companies that import things all the time, and that's a big deal to be an importer-exporter. You can do it. It's completely legal. Nothing wrong with it, but it's not trivial, right? You're expected to have all this insider information, understand all these things about taxes, know how to deal with the customs and all those things. There's a lot of moving pieces. You want to bring in a car of your own as a custom importer? Absolutely, you're allowed to do that. But even amongst car enthusiasts in the United States, American citizens who are car enthusiasts, it's considered a really extreme thing to do to import a car and bypass all the normal car import controls, right? And famously-ish, right, Porsche 959 was imported in Southern California, I want to say in the mid-90s, and the person who imported it was allowed to keep it but couldn't drive it on the road, right? They were allowed to keep it in a garage as a museum piece, but it was carefully controlled. You couldn't take it out. It was like this super expensive car, but it didn't meet U.S. Emission standards. And there was no parts for it. Not that that was a major concern to anyone who had a collector's item 959. But the point was, it was not a practical thing in any way. It was purely this super rich guy bringing in a museum piece to sit in his garage and gawk over. And that's cool. And he can drive it around his driveway if he wants. Not a problem, right? So that's kind of how you import cars into the U.S. You don't bring them in trivially. But if you have plenty of money, plenty of time, and are willing to go through the process of being a private importer, by all means, if that's a hobby you want to do, that's fine. Like, nothing wrong with that. Great. So we know bringing it into the US, that would be verging on crazy, right? Or just this rich hobby thing. To then bring them into Nicaragua is this exactly the same, right? There's all these hoops you got to jump through. You got to be at least a resident to be considered for it. You got to become a private importer. You got to navigate all these things that would be difficult in your home country. Now you're doing it in an adopted country. So there's a lot of things you just don't natively know. So you have these extra layers of difficulty, right? Not impossible. We're just turning up the difficulty knob because you're new to the system, and you don't have contacts. You don't know people who've done it. And then you're going to private import a vehicle. And then the same thing. If you private import into the US, where are you going to get parts? Well, presumably you're super rich and this isn't your main car. So you can wait for parts to be imported as well, because probably at least some of them won't match. Understood. We understand that when we're importing private into the US. Coming into Nicaragua, people have a tendency to forget that. We have a very small car market here. Our availability of car parts is small. So if you import a custom car, you're going to have a really hard time getting parts in, much harder than you would in the US. You can still do it. Nothing wrong with it. Just these are things that you have to assume. Okay, so it's a super rich thing to bring in a custom car to Nicaragua. It's going to take forever, and parts are going to be hard to get. Mechanics are going to be hard to find to work on it because they haven't seen whatever car this is before. It's going to be built for a different market, and then you have all these things you have to navigate. And so when we're doing it to the U.S., we know that it's a thing for the rich, things for hobbyists who have time and money. When you're doing it into Nicaragua, it should be the same. But there has a tendency to be like, well, wouldn't it be just a cheap and easy thing to be a private importer of custom vehicles into Nicaragua? And that should immediately, just in saying that, say, oh, there's no chance that that's going to be true. It's not that it's technically impossible. They could have some rule that's like, boy, if you're a resident, you can just bring in a car. I don't know anyone who has a rule like that, but they could in theory. So it's worth asking. It's worth checking. But the assumption should be this is a crazy hard thing that I would never expect would be easy to do. And then that's the case, right? The obvious thing bears out because that's how it always plays out, right? And so there's a ton of things like this that we find so often. I find that expats are caught off guard by things that they're surprised that things are just like they are wherever they came from, right? In my case, it's from the U.S., so it's wherever you're coming from. That being the same as what you should be used to surprises you is a weird reaction to someone who's autistic. It's like, I don't understand how that ends up being surprising. But I think the majority of people that I talk to, at least, are very much like blind to all those things in the US. And then when they're doing it in a new country, they don't take their knowledge or lack of knowledge from where they're coming from and apply that to where they are. So if you're like me and have some idea of what it takes to, not very much, but some idea of what it takes to import a car in the US, that tells me, well, I definitely don't want to do it in a different country. I also would generally take something that's like, and I don't know how to actually do it in the US. That tells me that I really don't know how to do it here. If I'm in any way not knowledgeable about it where I came from, then, whoa, I bet it's really hard and convoluted. Here, I think the same thought process is what gets people who come to a new country and are like, I'm going to become a business investor, right? I'm going to start a company. I'm going to start a business. It's going to do really well. And you're like, okay, did you do that in the country you came from? No. Do you know how much harder it is here? No, I don't know how much harder it is here, right? And so that lack of knowledge of how hard it is where you're coming from, combined with not evaluating what it was like where you're coming from, lends itself to a lot of those difficulties that people face, that they're doing things that are maybe not super hard, but reasonably hard in both countries. Something can be hard in the U.S., hard in Canada, hard in Guatemala, hard in Mexico, hard in Nicaragua, but they're looking at doing it in the one that they know least, the one that they have no experience in for the first time, and then are often surprised that it was so hard that they never did it in the place that they came from, which is probably easier because it's where they came from, than where they've moved to. So we see it as a recurring pattern that, and that's why I want to bring it up as a tool, because there's so many things. Like if you've never bought a house before, buying one in Nicaragua will be quite a bit harder for you. Now, if you've bought houses in the US and you're moving to Nicaragua, is it super hard? No, it's not super hard, but it's going to be harder than it was for you in the US or Canada. Just a little bit, because everything is more natural there. You've heard, even if you've never done it before, you've heard what to do. Nothing's going to catch you by surprise, hopefully. Coming to Nicaragua, nothing's weird, but some things might be slightly different than what you're expecting, than what's just in the social consciousness. And so you may have some surprises, a little bit more surprises than you would in the US. Buying a house is relatively easy. Buying a car, relatively easy. But there's a few things you just need to know. But when it comes to really hard things like starting your own business or becoming a custom importer, then if those things were hard for you where you came from, or so hard that you never did it casually, trust me, they're going to be at least quite a bit challenging here, if not impossible. So using this idea of reverse it, right? Anything you're thinking of doing, reverse it and say, did I do that in a country I'm from? Or am I aware of how hard it is? For example, people are often like, well, you can't just get citizenship in Nicaragua. And we're like, can you just get citizenship in the US? No, it's super hard. Residency's hard. Citizenship is super hard, right? Now, is it harder in Nicaragua? Yeah, it probably is. Citizenship. Residency's easier. Citizenship's harder. They're balanced a little bit differently. But people will often turn around and be like, well, but the US, it isn't that hard. Really? Compare that. It isn't as hard. It's true, but it's really close, right? And people aren't thinking in this comparative way, and countries are generally more similar than they are different. And so by looking at wherever you've come from, and this could be somewhere in Europe, it could be somewhere in Asia, right? It doesn't have to be the US. And some will be more similar than the US, some will be less. And each different thing, importing or citizenship or whatever, will be a little bit different. Some countries don't offer citizenship, period. Like, it's just not a thing. But by doing that, by reversing it and saying, okay, what is the process I know and how much of it do I know? And then apply that here. Okay, this is similar or dissimilar. It's harder. I know less. It'll give you a lot of building blocks to have kind of a starting point on understanding what things are likely to be like, or to give you a comparison as to, oh, it's not wildly different. This is actually a pretty standard thing that I've just not thought about previously, or I've not experienced firsthand previously. I'm now on the other side of the fence and forgot that that's what I am, right? And that's a big piece, right? People who are moving to Nicaragua, we often call ourselves expats and forget that all those immigrants in the U.S. are actually expats. They're not immigrants in most cases. They're expats, right? And so I'm not like that group. You are like that group. That's exactly what's going on. They're looking for residency. You're looking for residency. They're considering citizenship. You're considering citizenship. They're thinking about buying a car, and they're pretty sure they don't want to import one. You should be thinking about buying a car and be pretty sure you don't want to import one. The roles are surprisingly similar, but for some reason, and I kind of get it, but being who I am, it's a struggle. I have to be like, why would that not be the thing that's natural? Because to me, it is the natural thing to be like, those are the same thing. Like, I get, where's the difference? By looking at it from that perspective, it helps to be like, oh, yes, I wouldn't expect a new expat in the United States to, while being, brand new first week on the ground, to turn around and become a custom importer, something that I, as an American, would feel completely out of my depth trying to do casually. It would be a really major endeavor for me to do it. It would be an incredible endeavor for them to do it. That would be a really surprising reaction. So by applying that thought process to things, I think it'll make understanding any place that you're moving to a lot easier, because things will make more sense. And even if they don't make sense, if you don't understand why customs works the way that it does, or why importing works the way that it does. Understanding that everybody's importing works that way will help when you stop having this, why is it so crazy like this here? That's not really the case. It's this way everywhere, and it probably makes sense. That's why everyone's doing it the same. Just because you don't know what it is, when it's a new place, it's easy to jump to, they're doing something crazy. When you realize that every place you've ever been to does the same thing, it's harder to say they're all crazy. It's much more likely that you just have never experienced this before, and there may be factors you haven't thought through, and so you're unaware of why they do it the way that they do. For example, why is importing a car really hard? The same reason everywhere. Dealing with specialty cars in a country is really difficult for that country to deal with, and if they make it too easy, it will bypass their standard emissions control and importing processes. They don't want to undermine those businesses, so they have to make it more expensive and more difficult than the professional full-time importers that are working with the government to make sure those prices are low in huge quantity are doing. They have to, right? Or they're screwing over those businesses and will make the economy collapse as you start private importing cars all the time. Every expat will go out and private import a car and throw everything out of whack. It'll cause so many problems, and then the country will be full of cars with no mechanics or parts, right? And they don't want that to happen. So they're going to do things that make sense. And the U.S. does it for the same reason that Nicaragua does. It's just, you just don't see it in the U.S. Under normal circumstances. It would never occur to you to want to import a car from Nicaragua. But it's the exact same question that could be asked. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe if you'd like to help support the channel. You can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. It comes directly to me. It's like Patreon. Help support the channel. And take a moment to watch another video. That really does help a lot. Hit that thumbs up. I will see all of you tomorrow.